Hi, so I'm going to highlight 3 ways that the Trump administration followed the authoritarian playbook last week that you might have missed and that you really should know about. So the first is around suppressing dissent. I'm going to start with kind of the way that the administration has been attacking both domestic and international judges. So let's start domestically. And it all centers around this woman called Lindsay Halligan. She is a former personal lawyer to Donald Trump. And in September, she was appointed as interim US attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia after Trump fired the previous attorney. And then she immediately signed off on indictments against Trump's perceived enemies, James Comey and Letitia James. But then her appointment was ruled unlawful by a federal judge. And since then, the Department of Justice and federal judges have been in kind of a battle, with the Department of Justice repeatedly trying to appoint Lindsay Halligan and then judges saying it's unlawful, and note that she's not yet been approved by the Senate. And so last week, Pam Bondi, who's the Attorney General, basically attacked federal judges in Virginia, basically saying that they launched an unconscionable campaign of bias and hostility against Lindsay Halligan, who was recently, yet again, stripped of her US attorney title. So I actually think, the international threats are even bleaker. So effectively, Donald Trump's administration wants the International Criminal Court to amend its founding document specifically to say that it will never investigate Donald Trump or his top officials for their conduct during his administration. And they've also said that if the International Criminal Court does not do this, they will impose new US sanctions on it. So this is kind of a blatant threat on an international body. And you have to wonder what it exactly is that the administration is planning on doing, that they want the court to say it's never going to investigate them. Trump has also carried on attacking his kind of perceived political enemies. So he's been trying to undermine the independence of the Federal Reserve, which is kind of the America's central bank, ever since he took office, and he's had repeated attacks on its chair. But this time he is targeting the Biden-appointed members of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. So what Trump has done is he's asked Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to investigate whether Biden used an auto pen to sign their appointments. And the reason that's relevant is because the week before, Trump had declared everything that Biden signed with an auto pen invalid. It's not clear at all that he has the legal authority to do that. And it's basically a conspiracy theory because auto pens have been routinely used for years by both Democrat and Republican presidents. But it's just another way that he's trying to use the machinery of state to undermine the independence of the Federal Reserve. And then Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene fell out with Trump over the delay in releasing the Epstein files. And then last week, she sat down with CBS's 60 Minutes show and told them that Trump's repeated attacks on her, where he's described her as a traitor, has led to death threats against her and her family. Trump then posted on social media that the only reason Marjorie Traitor Brown went bad is that she was jilted by the President of the United States, brackets, certainly not the first time she has been jilted. He went on then to attack the networks, CBS and 60 Minutes, basically saying that my real problem with the show was the new ownership of 60 Minutes. Paramount would allow a show like this to air. They are no better than the old ownership who just paid me millions of dollars for fake reporting about your favorite president, me. And what this is referring to is that Trump had sued the old owners of CBS over an interview they did with Kamala Harris during the campaign. Paramount took over. He liked Paramount, and so he kind of assumed that they wouldn't run this show. And kind of speaking of the media, Paramount is in the news again. So basically this is what happened. So last week, Netflix announced they had agreed a deal to take over media giant Warner Brothers. And not incidental to the story, but CNN is owned by Warner Brothers. So Trump immediately said that he would have a say in whether the agreed takeover can go ahead, and it is normal for the federal government to take a view on really enormous mergers like this. But then it later emerged that same day that rival media giant Paramount was launching a hostile bid to defeat the Netflix bid. Paramount's bid includes Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Now, Paramount's CEO is David Ellison, and he's the son of the major Trump donor, billionaire Larry Ellison. And then it was reported that during a December visit to see Trump, David Ellison offered assurances that if he bought Warner Brothers, he would make sweeping changes to CNN. which Trump hates and calls fake news and claims is biased against him and so on. And 2 days after that, Trump then publicly called for CNN to be sold as part of the Warner Brothers Discovery deal. Continuing his attacks on the media, Trump was furious that the New York Times and some other outlets had been reporting that he might not be in good health. And that's basically after there were various occasions where he's been filmed, like falling asleep in important meetings and events. So he wrote on social media that reporting was seditious or even treasonous. Right, so the last kind of theme is all around kind of science and vaccines. The key thing to understand here is that you can prevent harm from disease and illness in lots of ways. So you can prevent exposure to what makes you sick. You can give people protection in case they get exposed. So that's like a vaccine. Or you can then cure them if they get sick, which is a treatment. Now, the most efficient way is to prevent illness in the first place. So let's think about exposure. So the chemical formaldehyde is all around us, and it is a known cause of cancer. It can also trigger asthma, miscarriages, and fertility problems. It's a really common chemical. It's used in industries ranging from furniture manufacturing to construction and plastics to healthcare and lab settings and even some beauty treatments. And then last week, the Environmental Protection Agency announced that it is revising an assessment of the health dangers posed by formaldehyde. So effectively what it did is it doubled what it had previously deemed to be a safe amount of exposure, which basically means that we'll all be more exposed to formaldehyde if you live in America. Now, working on that new advice were two former industry insiders who are both now top EPA officials. And then kind of moving on to kind of preventing disease through vaccine. So 2 weeks ago, which I covered last week, the RFK-appointed CDC vaccination panel recommended that newborns should no longer receive the newborn hepatitis B vaccine, which was against all scientific advice, by the way. And then last week, Trump said that the US is going to reduce vaccines very substantially. He further said, falsely, by the way, he said, I think we take like 88 different shots all wrapped up into one big glass of stuff like that, and we're going to be reducing it very substantially. And he then ordered RFK Jr., the health secretary, to look into reorganizing the childhood vaccine schedule, to which RFK Jr. responded, thank you, Mr. President, we're on it. So as I kind of mentioned last week, while the CDC recommends vaccines, it's the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, that actually approves and regulates them. So while this is all going on, Vinay Prasad, who's director of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, announced wide-ranging but vague changes to vaccine regulations in an email, where he also claimed with no evidence that the COVID vaccination has killed children. So we don't know exactly what those changes are going to be, but we do know that that very same day, the CDC released a report on the effectiveness of last winter's COVID boosters for children, so 2024-25 winter. And that report said that basically last year's COVID booster for children reduced COVID-associated emergency department or urgent care visits by 75% in children under 5 and by 56% in older children. And then finally in this section, I just want to talk about preventative treatments. So, and this is for an illness, a respiratory illness called RSV, which stands for respiratory syntactical virus. And basically in the US, every year, an estimated 60 to 80,000 children under the age of 5 are hospitalized due to RSV. It's a common and reasonably serious childhood illness across the world. And the CDC basically recommends, or did recommend, that you use one of two ways to protect babies from getting really sick with RSV. The first is to vaccinate the mother against RSV during pregnancy, and that can protect the newborn. And the second one is that you can kind of immunize young babies against RSV, against their first kind of winter season where they'll first be exposed to it, by giving them kind of an antibody treatment. And so last week, the FDA informed the pharmaceutical companies that they're approved protective RSV treatments for infants would face fresh scrutiny following concerns raised by vaccine skeptics. Now, leading medical societies and many state health officials say that RFK Jr. is basically trying to dismantle a program that prevents disease and saves lives, and that he's doing it not based on the scientific evidence. right? So that covers kind of what's been going on this week, and come back next week. And in the meantime, for any details on these actions and plenty of others, you can visit the trumpactiontracker.info. And in fact, last week we passed 2,000 logged actions since January 2025.